I'm Erin Redbord, and this is TRM Talks. I am Global Head of Policy at TRM Labs. At TRM, we provide blockchain intelligence software to support law enforcement investigations and to help financial institutions and cryptocurrency businesses mitigate financial crime risk within the emerging digital asset economy. Prior to joining TRM, I spent 15 years in the U.S. federal government, first as a prosecutor at the Department of Justice, and then as a Treasury Department official, where I worked to safeguard the financial system against terrorist financiers, weapons of mass destruction proliferators, drug kingpins, and other rogue actors. On TRM Talks, I sit down with business leaders, policymakers, investigators, and friends from across the crypto ecosystem who are working to build a safer financial system. Today, we're talking to Santa Clara Prosecutor Erin West. But first, inside the lab, where I share data-driven insights from our blockchain intelligence team. Cryptocurrency has become a central issue in the 2024 U.S. presidential election, intersecting with campaign finance, election integrity, and security. Former President Trump openly supports crypto, having spoken at key Bitcoin conferences and even launching his own crypto project. Vice President Kamala Harris, seemingly more reticent, called for the U.S. to maintain its dominance in blockchain technology and heralded the idea of crypto regulation in a recent speech. Both candidates and the PACs that support them are accepting some form of cryptocurrency. This development presents new opportunities for political engagement, but also introduces challenges related to regulation and security. In a recent TRM Insights piece, I explained that all 6 high-profile election interference cases since 2016 have involved the use of cryptocurrencies. This underscores a move by illicit actors, particularly those with connections to Russia, who are looking to new technology to raise and move funds. These 6 cases involve a diverse lineup of illicit actors, including Russian news outlets, paramilitary groups, hackers, and Russian intelligence services. Russia has fostered an illicit finance ecosystem of darknet markets, non-compliant cryptocurrency businesses, ransomware, and paramilitary groups. All these pieces of Russia's money laundering puzzle play a role in interference and disinformation. In that latest Insights piece, we go through some of these specific election interference cases and talk about the way cryptocurrency is used. So while both candidates are talking about crypto policy and regulation, it's also important to understand how illicit actors are using crypto for disinformation and election interference. For much more, read that full piece on TRM's Insights page, The Crypto Election, Crypto Disinformation, and Presidential Politics. Now let's sit down with Erin West. Today, I am here with a friend and very, very special guest, Erin West of the Santa Clara DA's office, the REACT Task Force, and dare I say, the leading voice of mitigating the risk of pig butchering and other fraud in the crypto space. Erin, I have been wanting to do this forever. Thank you so much for joining TRM Talks.
I'm so glad to be here. You and I spoke at ACAMS last year. We did the remote TRM Talks, which was great, but I have not been in studio.
It really was an awesome conversation. We had just started kind of working on the Tracers Fellowship program with your team. And, you've done so much of this and have had so many conversations. And I think one thing that's often missing from these is your sort of personal journey. We always hear about victims and of fraud and financial crime, but would love to hear how you really became a crusader for, stopping pig butchering, but really so much more.
Yeah, it's really funny that to think about when I first heard about pig butchering in March of 2022, I was at the REACT task force. I work with a local task force made up of detectives from local agencies who do high-tech crimes. And I was just going around the room asking detectives what they were working on. And John Aldridge said, "Well, I'm working on pig butchering. Have you heard of that?" And I'd never heard of it. And little did I know that it would dramatically change the course of my life and give me an opportunity to pursue being a helper and helping people and trying to figure out a better way for people to get help and to identify this massive problem. So I've been a prosecutor for 26 years, and I've really found myself most fulfilled when I am in assignments that are really victim heavy, that I did 9 years in sexual assault, and then I am the hate crimes prosecutor. And then now in this situation, I feel like there is a whole underrepresented population of victims that just aren't getting heard. And this group is getting bigger by the day.
We're going to dig into so much of that. Let me kind of take you a little bit further back, actually. I think I was a prosecutor for about 11 years, and I think everyone kind of has their moment. For me, I was doing a federal clerkship, and I saw an AUSA walking around the courtroom in a violent crime case, and I said, I want to be that guy. I felt like, it was mission driven. He was doing the right thing. And honestly, just being in court and the theatrics of that, I think really appealed to me. Did you have a moment like that?
Well, I love that you asked that, because I went to civil litigation out of law school, and I worked for a law firm that represented international airlines, which was interesting. From lost bags, I'm very familiar with what you can get for your lost bag, and it's not much, to breaking a tooth on airplane food, to actual air disasters. But as I sat there, I spent a lot of time feeling like I was a small cog, and that I wasn't really making much of an impact on anything, and that the fights and that I found it to be very uncivil, the civil litigation. There was a lot of yelling and a lot of like really awful treatment of lawyer to lawyer. And I watched my friends that had graduated the same time I did and went to work at local district attorney's offices. And I would talk to them and I'd be like, you have your own cases and you go into court and you're the person, like you're running this whole thing. And you have the ability to dismiss a case if you can't prove it, or really dig in if someone has been taken advantage of. I was like, that's the job for me. That sounds great. And you're right. There is definitely, I mean, I'm very organized and I'm a strong presenter, so that certainly appealed to me. But the opportunity to be able to help people in that way, in ways that I chose to rather than I was being told to in civil litigation, was just very appealing.
You have such a different role today, and we'll sort of dig into that in the ecosystem more broadly. But I think about, I also was a sex offense and domestic violence prosecutor in sort of my early days, right? I was at the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C., where everyone is a local prosecutor. So we're prosecuting violent crime and theft and drugs and domestic violence. And, I remember being in courtrooms where I saw the case for the very first time when I walked in the door, right? There's like a pile of 20 jackets, and you pick one up. You have no idea what's going to happen. The judge says, Mr. Redbord, are you ready? And I shout out to the courtroom, is Sarah here, who's the victim in the case? And if Sarah's there, we're ready to go. And if she's not, we dismiss the case. Like, you've now moved on to a more sophisticated practice. But what were those early days like for you?
I loved every minute of it. I thought I
Yeah.
had landed in the best job ever. And one of the pieces that you didn't mention, but I bet you felt too, was the camaraderie of the team. And going back to the DA's office after hard fought things and saying, and can you believe the judge let this in? And they'd be like, oh, that's awful. Or, oh, well, actually, that usually does come in. Like just the learning process and having a team there who got it and had maybe only just learned that 2 weeks ago themselves in a DUI trial. So I loved that. I loved the rapid pace. I loved the, when I could fit 2 trials in a week, that was a really good week. And I felt then, and I feel today still, that I've landed in the best job ever.
It's the hustle and all the things you do in those early days are so many of those things that you're still doing today, which is like really, really fun to watch. And the camaraderie thing is so exactly on. You get beat up. It's always raining on your way back to court. My exhibits were melting in the wet. But at least you knew you had your colleagues to go back to and regale and talk trash about judges and all that good stuff.
And to have your back. I mean, how many times were you in court and you're like, I need a certified rap sheet. Can you bring that over? And they were like, yes, because they knew you would do it for them the next day.
So, I hope it's okay that I bring this up, but when we chatted a couple days ago to kind of prep-ish for this, although I don't know if there was a lot of prep happening, you were over at React because you clicked on a link. Of all people in the world, who's like always constantly telling all of us about red flags, you clicked on a link and potentially a threat actor gained access to your phone.
Can you believe that?
I can't believe that happened. Tell me about that.
Well, I almost love that it did happen, because it was a genuine wake up and it was a genuine educational piece. So here's what happened. I wake up at 5:30 and I am scrolling through my phone, and I see I had been in conversation the night before over LinkedIn, going back and forth with a victim, trying to be helpful. That victim was really frustrated with the system. And I knew that victim was frustrated. Then I wake up the next morning before dawn, I'm scrolling my phone, I'm just waking up, and I see an email from a victim and saying, like, I don't think you understand how bad the problem is. I am a victim and I don't feel like you're hearing me. I've asked you 3 times for a meeting and I put up a website. And perhaps you just don't care about senior men who are being hit by pig butchers. And I was like, yes, I do. Of course I do. Let me see this website. And as soon as I hit it, I was like, oh my God. Oh my God. I cannot believe I just did that. And it's so instructive for so many reasons, right? That how many times have I said, don't click on a link from someone you don't know, right? Like we all know that. But the point is, it was so well executed. And that's who our enemy is these days. It's not the obvious ones that we're going to think of. It's not like I know I'm not going to click on Norton antivirus. I'm not going to click on US Postal Service. But wow, if you're a victim and you don't think you've been helped, of course I'm going to click on your thing. And whoever targeted me with that knew that I would. And so then I rolled into React and forwarded the email, and they went through it, and they told me that they thought it was most likely a canary token. It just probably gave up my IP address, but the point was made. And it teaches me a new way of teaching about this too. Number one, we are all vulnerable, because I don't know how many times I've had a question from a victim talk to me and say, Erin, I'm a smart person. And it was like, I'm a smart person and I'm a worldwide expert in this. And I clicked on this stupid thing this morning. So it happens to the best of us. And goodness, I'm sorry to say it, but we have got to be so vigilant. We have to be vigilant 24/7 in a way that we have never had to be before.
We have to be vigilant. And I've been SIM swapped. I clicked on all kinds of links. Like we've all made these huge mistakes, but it also really speaks to kind of like the understanding piece, right? Like, I mean, these are not stupid people clicking on links or being taken advantage of. Like this could absolutely, I mean, we're talking about this happening to the foremost expert in the world on this topic who dreams of red flags when she's sleeping, right? I mean, I think that's really important to understand that when this does happen to someone, it's not their fault. It can happen to anyone and is happening to like the foremost experts in the world as well.
I think that's a really good point. I think I'm embarrassed to say this happened, but I'm not embarrassed, actually. Like, I just say the word embarrassed because that seemed like the right thing to say, but I'm not embarrassed. That's how good they are. And so that's where we find ourselves. And so many victims I talk to, I wish could give themselves a little more grace and a little more kindness. And I hope my story resonates that we're all going to, and we're actually, the language is changing. What we don't want to say is fault for this anymore. What we want to say is we're all going to be subjected to some assailant coming for us. And we just have to keep our shield up and stay vigilant.
Absolutely. Look, I want to spend a lot more time on this and kind of like addressing the problem, but just from like a level setting perspective. What's the problem here, right? What is pig butchering? What is the scope of it?
So pig butchering at its core is a long con. It is primarily a romance scam, but can also be a friendship scam / cryptocurrency investment scheme. And also there's new ways of doing it too that's not always cryptocurrency, but it's basically what's going to happen is a scammer is going to contact one of these victims by sending out what appears to be a wrong number text, or perhaps even these days they seem to be infiltrating Facebook groups and commenting and trying to make friends that way. They're coming in on LinkedIn and saying that they're moving to your city. Could you talk about the weather there? They're getting more and more smart about how they're reaching out and not as obvious, just like the thing I clicked on, not as obvious. And so what they do is they make contact with the victim, and then they spend the next 4 or 5, I was going to say 4 or 5 months, but it can be shorter or longer, but at least 90 days spending time getting to know that victim and becoming the relationship that victim always wanted. And spending up to 4 hours a day texting with their victim and really getting to know them and developing a trust. The scammer is going to be showing this fictitious lifestyle that is an elevated lifestyle. They're going to be showing that they can afford nice cars, nice trips. And then at some point, they will get into a conversation of how the scammer is able to afford all this. And it's because they've got this fantastic investment opportunity that they'd love to tell you about too. And by then, our victims are in deep. They are in love with this person. They can imagine the rest of their lives with this person, and they can see the benefits of this investment plan. So, of course, when they are given the opportunity to make a small investment just to try it, they do try it. Now, technically, what is happening on the other side is, and this is important to know if you are in the banking industry or the other, the pieces of this is our victims are taking their US dollars out of their banking, out of their retirement accounts, out of their savings, and they are going to wire it or move it in some way to a cryptocurrency exchange, a legitimate exchange. From there, they're going to be instructed how to turn those US dollars into a stable coin like USDT, Tether. Then it's still in the control of our victims. It's when the scammer suggests, now you want to put it in my special investment platform that I know will make you riches. That's when our victims are really losing control of their money. What they'll see is a beautiful dashboard that makes it look like their money is growing exponentially. But what really is happening is that money is long moved down the blockchain into the hands of the scammer. And so our victims are encouraged by seeing that rise in their funds. And so they keep putting in more and more. And, it's funny, it goes back to what happened to me in that, like, they prey on certain pieces of our personalities. They prey on a rise in adrenaline or creating a situation where you're triggered in some way. Just like I was triggered in that email, like, oh my gosh, you don't think I want to help you? Of course I want to help you. And they will try and trigger our victims in this way too. And like, I'll invest with you. I'll put my money in with you. Don't you love me? If you loved me, we'd do this together. So they're using really smart psychological tactics. And that induces our victims to put their money in. And at the end of the day, these scams don't end until our victims have put every last penny in this. And then they're charged taxes on top of that. And then they'll say, well, take it out of my gains. And now they've got to come up with new money. That's when they're taking on debt. They're borrowing from parents. They're doing a payday loan. And at the end, this is a whole new class of victims that are absolutely devastated. They've lost their entire financial comfort of knowing that they're financially set. And then it was all done at the hands of someone that they trusted implicitly.
It's really extraordinary. And I think this is why so many people and your leading voice here are so passionate about this issue. Just like there's no profile for a victim, there's also no profile for the scammer. But tell me about, so what do we know? What do you know about the person on the other side of that text message?
That is the mic drop here. That is, I often hear about people who are like, oh, well, I just play with them after they reach out to me. And I was like, well, please don't do that, because those people are human trafficked and they're going to get beaten if they don't make their quota for that day. So these scams are happening in an industrial scale, in a very, very sophisticated operation that is being run by Chinese organized crime, primarily in Southeast Asia, but now that footprint is spreading. They're being done in casino towers with bars over the windows so that people can't escape. They're being done in compounds where people are led to believe that they're coming in to get a good job. These scammers attract their workforce by putting up really well done advertisements that are advertising jobs for people who are multilingual, for people who know how to do graphic design. These people with a 20% unemployment rate in Southeast Asia think that this is a great opportunity. They're going through job interviews and getting these jobs. And then what they find out is they're flown to Bangkok, their passports are taken, and they are bussed into these compounds where the door slams shut behind them and there are guards with AK-47s. And I think what continues to really drive me in the eradication of this situation is the scale. And it's estimated to be, the UN and United States Institute of Peace have estimated it at 300,000 people who are locked into modern day slavery, forced to do this work. And what's worse, and what isn't talked about nearly enough because it's unpleasant, is the type of torture that these people are facing when they don't make quotas. And we've had the opportunity, there was a recent raid in the Philippines where we got windows in to see this scam facility. And we got to learn that the walls are made of paper because they want, in the torture rooms, because they want everyone to hear how bad it is. We know that they are forcing women into sexual assault situations. It's a really horrendous, vile place. I mean, both sides of this are equally destructive to the poor victims who are being forced to comply.
It's an extraordinary situation where you have victims on both ends of the fraud scheme here. I think that this is very different. I was a prosecutor. I had my head down and I cared about one thing in one moment, and that was my case. There was a bad guy. I need to prosecute that case, or I need to figure out how to resolve that case, short of trial. And that was all I had to worry about. You're a very different kind of prosecutor now. I don't even know if you are a crusader. You're focused on this issue. You're focused on education. But how did you get to this place?
What I would say is, I spent 24 years in the courtroom before I found myself at this place. And so I think I was becoming more and more disillusioned as my career went on, in feeling that it was becoming very, very difficult for victims to see justice in a lot of different ways for a lot of different reasons. And that was frustrating to me. And then when specifically pig butchering was coming my way and I was seeing a whole class of victim that was destroyed. Like, I'm having grown men cry on the phone to me. That has never in my career happened. And I've prosecuted murder and kidnapping. But these people were destroyed and suicidal. And I knew that people were killing themselves. And it felt like things could be made better for them. That the experience they were having with the criminal justice system wasn't okay. And I felt like that criticism of the criminal justice system best comes from inside the criminal justice system. Sometimes when we are in it, it's very hard for us to take advice from people who are not in it about how we should be doing our business. And what I was seeing firsthand was, I fully own that I am a very lucky prosecutor to have a task force that I work with that has manpower and skills. And what I was seeing was I was equipped to be able to help victims trace their cryptocurrency. And we figured out a way we shoehorned it into California law to recover their assets and get them back to them. So then people started coming out of the woodwork to me and saying, hey, I'm in Orange County, California. Can you help me? I'm in Dallas, Texas. Can you help me? And we could. We figured out where their money was. We were able to figure out a means for them to get their money. And we tried to then bring it to these local jurisdictions, and they were not ready for it at all. And they were not prepared, and they did not see cryptocurrency as anything that they were about to get into. And so that was frustrating. And then I spoke to victims in my own county who had gone to police agencies and been turned away and told this is a civil matter, and been told, well, once it goes into crypto, it's gone. And, the money's overseas now. We can't do anything to help you. And just a lot of misinformation that was believed. And the more I heard that, the more I was like, well, this isn't okay. We've got to do something about it. And I think it was just right time in my life, right time in my career, that I felt like I've got enough authority of having tried cases that I've seen a general decline in customer service. We've got to do better. And so I started looking for ways that we could do better. And it felt like there were some good ways that we could do better. And, and some of them involved TRM. It was when I started thinking about, okay, well, we've got to teach what we know how to do in Santa Clara County. And then I was like, well, these people need a tool. Like they're not going to be able to do this without a tool. How are we going to fund that? How are we going to get that done? You may have heard the story, but it was just a frustrating night. And I emailed your CEO and I said, we just need help. This is what's happening. And I don't see a way forward. And that's when TRM worked to create the TRM Fellowship, where access to tools were made to a number of local jurisdictions, which has enabled a lot of victims to get so much help. And so good builds on good. When I saw that could happen, I was like, well, then we need to do more of this, and we need to bring more people together, and we need them teaching them. And we need more than just React teaching these. Let's see what Alona Katz in Brooklyn is doing, and let's learn from her. I think that there's so much opportunity to learn. And anyway, so to get back to it, I felt like there was stuff that could be done, and it just needed someone to do it.
It seems to me that there are two ways to kind of deal with this issue. The one is, I think, a lot of what you just described, and that is like the capacity building, the coalition building. And the second piece is like the tracing, is the investigations. Talk to me a little bit about like what you've seen done successfully and how we can do more of that.
I am so glad you asked, because there's always a Well, let me tell you what happened today. So today I was on the phone with Massachusetts Attorney General's office. I had asked recently for, hey, guys, send me your success stories. And I was delighted at what poured in. But here's what's different. I love what's different. So Massachusetts Attorney General says, we're doing this civilly and we're having a lot of success. And what was really cool on the call is we were talking and she goes, I don't know if you remember this, but at your crypto conference, this was in January, she's like, that was the day that we got our first transfer of funds from Binance. And Kyle Armstrong of TRM gave us a shout out when he was talking. And I was like, oh, that's so great.
It's awesome.
Yeah. So it all goes full circle, right? Like good, bringing good, people working together. And so what she was able to develop speaks to one of my fundamental principles, which is like, do what you can with where you are. Like figure out what tools do you have and make the most of them. And so Massachusetts Attorney General, like they're not doing this in a criminal way. They're doing it in a civil way. And they figured out a way she told me all about it. You get the temporary freeze, you get a preliminary injunction, and then you get a formal injunction against them. And from there, you are able to even collect attorney's fees on the money that was stolen and fees for having gone through this process. And what they are able to do is seize bigger amounts of money and then trace back and figure out what other states' victims can also access that money. And so she gave me a great example of they froze a wallet. It had a lot of money in it. They traced back as many Massachusetts victims as they can. That's their jurisdiction. That's all they can do. But then they said, oh, there's some Florida victims here. And they reached out to Florida, who also is part of the TRM Fellowship and part of my crypto coalition. And Florida was like, yeah, we'll take the rest of them. That's the beauty of working together and knowing what you're capable of and using the tools at your disposal. So I think the success of what we're seeing in the crypto coalition and now with Operation Shamrock is exactly what you said. You've got to sift through a lot of people who are lurkers, and you got to find your workers. You got to find you call them builders. We've got to find the doers. We've got to find the people who are like, I'm going to figure out a way to get this done. No, this hasn't been done before, but I think I can figure out a way. That's innovation, and a can-do attitude is going to carry the day as we fight this formidable enemy.
I love the innovation piece and the sort of creativity piece, right? What else can be done?
I think it's important to not only make people aware of what's happening, but so say if I was making an example of what happened to me, I think the takeaway of that is be aware of the psychological tricks. Like be aware of times where you're getting some sort of electronic communication that triggers you in some way. Like that may be a piece that someone hadn't thought of before. But you asked about the bigger picture, and I was writing a memo about that this morning. I've got lots of ideas. I think there are so many things that could be done by so many different pieces of our government system. And I think that the first thing to do is get organized. And I think that organization of law enforcement needs to include our traditional criminal law enforcement, as well as our regulators, as well as any government agencies that have the authority to make some sort of impact. And when we do that, we really, I'm a huge advocate of including our state and locals in that. And this is a situation where state and local has to be part of it. They have to be at the table because they're the ones on the ground floor. And you ask where my passion comes from, and my passion is about being in the weeds with these victims every day and seeing what they go through and just getting the copies of texts that are sent to them. One of the newest things that we're seeing now is that these scammers are getting vile toward our victims, that when the victims aren't doing what they want them to do, they start turning the tables on victims and saying really horrible things to them that are based on things that they have been told in confidence as my trusted love partner, right? You know all the buttons to push, and now you're going to flip it and say them back to me and make me feel horrible. That's what our victims are experiencing. So I think any kind of solution that doesn't include those of us on the ground floor in the weeds is flawed. And so in a positive way, I think you sit everyone down at the table and you look at where your best resources are, and you look at the locals as an opportunity to be the data collectors and really, educate what needs to be collected to really do this work. What needs to be collected for triage and what needs to be collected for the bigger picture of tracking down who is running these criminal enterprises and what the best means are to disrupt them. And so have the locals be the data collectors, have have the FBI and DOJ be looking at the bigger picture of where we can sanction these people, where we can disrupt their money movement, where we can. And I'm a big proponent of, I think we can get hands on these people. We know these people travel. They've got too much money to just sit alone in Myanmar and Cambodia. We know they have big houses elsewhere. We know they have kids that attend the best universities in the world. And so I think there are opportunities to grab them. So I think coming up with a consistent national plan that looks to what can the SEC do? Where is Secret Service best leverage? What can HSI do? What can we do in our fusion centers? I think our fusion centers are a massive opportunity.
Absolutely. And speaking of, you mentioned this one time, but I wanted to make sure we got this out. Shamrock. Would you just kind of describe the origins of that and like what exactly it is?
In March 2022, we started working on these pig butchering cases, and I've been really knee deep in them ever since that date. And when I was thinking about what could we do as a bigger picture, what can we do? We can educate, seize, and disrupt. Those are things that all of us can do at any point. I started talking about educate, seize, disrupt, educate, seize, disrupt. And then I started thinking about, it was near March. And I was like, I should really call this something and make it something. So I named it Operation Shamrock just because I was looking for a trio of something. And it was in March. And I was like, oh, who doesn't love a shamrock? And that's a hopeful thing. And who doesn't love green? And my name's Erin, which means Ireland. Like this sounds great. So let's call it up and people will remember it. And so I named it that. And then it wasn't until this year in March of 2024 that we are in now that I really said, okay, let's put this into practice. I think everybody in the world wants to have a functional private-public partnership. We say it all day, every day. And I thought, well, you know what? Then let's do it. Let's just stop talking about it and start doing it. So I started interviewing everybody who has a piece in the life cycle of pig butchering, from social media to banking to cryptocurrency exchanges to law enforcement to blockchain analytics to NGOs to diplomacy and victim services. And I got them all to come to a big kickoff. And I explained how big this problem is and how ugly it is and how we've applied literally no friction over 4 years, and that they're way ahead of us. They're running circles around us and they are benefiting from our disorganization. And so what if we could, I love to say, what if we could join up and bring ourselves together and manage specific problems that we can identify? So we did. We've divided into 5 working groups. There's tech, banking, law enforcement, foreign policy, and victims. And in each of those groups, there's strong leadership from inside and outside of government. And there are goals that are being checked off by our doers. And just yesterday, we had a great call with over 130 agents, workers from credit unions and small banking. And I realized, gosh, there's a lot they don't know that we could share with them. You know, that they need to know about the financial fraud kill chain. They need to know about opportunities that they have, and they need to know about this typology. So that's what Shamrock is. We're going to get that message out there every which way we can, and we're going to bring people together who are interested in doing something about it.
The journey is so crazy. Like, I mean, I know going back to kind of the beginning of this conversation, it's like this 26-year journey as a prosecutor, but really it's been a 2-year journey as sort of a crusader for this issue in many respects. And it's like, it's fun to have watched and been right there watching you in 2023, I think, build the relationships, build the coalition, build the credibility, right, to have these conversations. And now 2024 has all about execution. It's just like cool to see how it's all come together. Hopefully this will be the first of many times we have these conversations and kind of get the word out there, because I do think at the end of the day, as you and I both know, as much as I want to trace our way out of this thing, I don't think that's the answer. It's going to be education and really all the tremendous work you're doing. So thank you on behalf of TRM, and also just, personally, just so proud of the work you're doing.
That's so nice. That's so nice. Well, I think we're both in this for a while, so I will expect to be back on TRM Talks with updates.
Thank you so much for joining TRM Talks, Erin. We'll talk soon. It's always so cool to talk to Erin, and I think what actually people heard today is a version, a lot of the private conversations that she and I have had really over the last 2 years. And it's, all right, how can we address this problem? And I think she really laid out really eloquently the sort of the 3 buckets. First and foremost is that education piece, right? How can we provide red flags to folks to get them to not become victims in the first place? And the next is the tracing. Obviously, super honored about the role TRM has been able to play in terms of providing licenses to tracers out there in state and local governments across the world to give them the capability they need to track and trace the flow of funds, hopefully to seize them back. And finally, it's that sort of national security piece, which is really so interesting, right? Like, what are other tools that we have globally? So I think she really kind of broke those down really well. But I think for me, the most interesting part of the conversation was like the way her role and quite frankly, life has evolved around this issue. Having been a prosecutor, it's pretty myopic. You're just focused on your case. And now she is like the leading voice of a global crusade to stop bad actors from taking advantage of people. And it's so interesting to see the way she has come into and really built that role. So there's so many aspects to this conversation, which I love, but I think it was her journey to a really, really unique role, which I thought was the most extraordinary. On the next TRM Talks, I sit down with crypto lawyer Matt McGuire. If you love the show, leave a review wherever you're listening to it. Follow us on LinkedIn to subscribe to our newsletter, The Weekly Roundup, to get the latest news on crypto regulation, compliance, and investigations.
TRM Talks is brought to you by TRM Labs, the leading provider of blockchain intelligence and anti-money laundering software. This episode was produced in partnership with Voltage Productions. The music for this show was provided by Ecolix.
Now, let's get back to building.